My stepmother and her pregnant daughter from a previous marriage who works in escort demanded that I give them my house and move out. Indifferent father and wicked stepmother attempted to evict me from my own home to give it to my entitled pregnant stepsister after her boyfriend abandoned her and she had nowhere to go. I'm a 35-year-old male, and my stingy, self-serving, and usually absent father, now 63, recently discovered my earnings. Surprisingly, he decided to evict me from my own house, all under the guise of family obligation. Laura, my 28-year-old stepsister and daddy's little princess, has miraculously ended up pregnant. Given her self-reliant ambitions of being an escort and an OnlyFans content creator, she struggles to secure a place to live. Now, father wants to solve everything, and I'm the solution. Unfortunately, I must relinquish my house and hard-earned money to this woman because of her poor choices. I'm the child my father repeatedly refused to acknowledge as his responsibility. But ever since he found out about my new home, job, and unexpectedly good income, he's been quite eager to remind me of our blood relation. While I'm not thrilled with his constant reminders, he also aims to solidify my ties to his wife and her daughter. Granted, she's technically my father's child too, but I was cast aside too early to form any real connection with her. Lucky for me, as I'd be so disillusioned. Before you start judging, I just want to vent my emotions here. I have opinions, thoughts, and feelings to express. They might not sit well with you, and you may disagree, but I'm sharing them anyway because, frankly, I have no one else to confide in. Now, let me introduce Laura, short for Lauren, who's my half-sister. She's about 6 years younger than me and is making our father proud. Literally, Dad is delusional because this woman is doing nothing but being an escort, sleeping around with a failing OnlyFans, and my father calls her his pride. Yep, you read that right. I'm guessing he's unaware of the full extent of her activities. Who's going to enlighten him? I'm not particularly conservative, but I focus on my morals and career. I date women when I have the time to get to know them better. Sometimes there's a connection, but other factors come into play like distance and availability issues. Other times, there's no understanding at all. I try not to sleep with random people. I believe in waiting for the right woman. Having a high number of partners disgusts me. I don't understand why some men flaunt it like a trophy. Disgusting. Anyway, that's my personal approach. Sadly, my stepsister has a different outlook. She's probably lost count of her partners. Being an escort disgusts me, and it's also extremely dangerous. Some men do weird things to escorts. I can't fathom how anyone thinks it's okay to work in that field. Then she posts inappropriate videos and photos of herself online to make money, and she's not very successful at it. Probably doesn't know how to attract traffic, but for whatever reason, it's failing. How do I know? Here's an embarrassing story. A friend told me about it. He said Laura texted him after they met for a drink and asked if he wanted to have fun. Hearing this, I was already irritated because he went out with my sister, but he said he didn't know she was my sister at the time. I don't know if he's lying, but he said she sent him the link to her page, and he showed it to me. She's always broke and asking Dad for money, so it's clearly not working out for her. I couldn't bring myself to ask her about it directly, and I never told Dad either. Another time, I saw her taking a call and then sitting in a car with an older man. He gave her flowers, and they drove off. She would sneak back into the house through the window at odd hours. I noticed this when I came home from college for the holidays. I don't know if she's still doing it, but I don't want any part of it. I have a respectable job, and I'm happy with it. Finally, I haven't spent much time with the new family since Dad sent me away at every opportunity. But I've seen Laura enough to know she takes after her mother, Susan, now 59. Susan believed she was quite the icon in her prime. She used to be a flight attendant and was attractive to womanizers like my dad. Now, she's a typical botched-face Karen, if you know what I mean. With her claw-like hands and long nails, she manages a neighborhood daycare. Weird how parents trust her with their kids. She might poke a child's eye out with those nails. Anyway, she's just as meddlesome as her nails. She has an opinion on everything and loves to create problems in other people's lives. She has a grating voice and more plastic in her body than an ocean. She's as genuine as fake leather. She influences Dad for the worst. I believe she was a major reason why my dad didn't hesitate to send me away to boarding school when I was 9, because she didn't want to raise a child that wasn't hers. Now let me tell you about my dad. He's the main problem in all this. He thinks everything he does is justified because he's lived a full life and knows better. He says he regrets having me because I'm nothing like him. Thank God for that. My mom was a strong woman. She knew her priorities and took good care of my dad, but they fell out. She used to tell me Dad wasn't a bad person, just different, and no matter what happens, he's always going to be my dad and I should never forget that. But she was a good soul. She didn't want to poison my thoughts against my father. I'm sure he was as unbearable to her as he is today. They separated and divorced a few months later. I was 5 years old, and 2 months after the divorce, Dad married Susan. They had Laura when I turned 6, and then my mom died in a car crash. I can't forget it because she was on her way to pick me up from school. She was always on time. Just once she was 10 minutes late. To me, it felt like an hour, but it was 10 minutes. She got hit at an intersection by a drunk driver. He survived, and she did not. He got a DUI, and I was left alone. I waited at school, and it took them 2 hours to come and get me. I was lied to and confused when my dad arrived. I'll never forget his annoyance when he looked at Susan and asked what they should do about me. And she said, "Your kid, your problem. Dad, now you can't tell me I have to take care of your spoiled kid. I have a stable job now and manage a few small businesses on the side. I've worked hard since I was 16 and have been earning since. After boarding school, I went to college and only visited during holidays, so I've been on my own since 9. I've put in a lot of effort to get where I am and recently bought a house. It's a nice little place, much better than the shared apartment I had with friends. It was a life goal I thought I'd never achieve. I just moved in last month. I may not like my family much, but basic decency was to involve them in a moment this big, so I invited them to the housewarming too. My dad's reaction was sad to watch. He looked envious, a little annoyed, and asked about the furniture, architect, and interior designer. I gave him some information, and he responded with taunts like, "I wouldn't know. You never bothered telling me," trying to gain attention and making our weak relationship obvious in front of friends and colleagues, even my boss. A week passed, and I got a call from him. I was at work, managing a complex project. He said he wanted to meet urgently, and I agreed. I went home to find an angry Susan and tear-eyed Laura giving me the side-eye from the living room. Dad was in the kitchen taking out bottles of beer. He offered me one, and I politely declined, worried about what he'd say. I asked what he wanted, and he raised his brows and responded with another question, asking if I'd finally started caring about them. I frowned, confused by his question. He asked me to join Laura and Susan in the living room. I nodded and sat on a couch across from them. Laura folded her arms and Susan rolled her eyes. Dad sat with them, facing me. He put his beer bottle on the coffee table and leaned back. He then asked if I was blind. There was a pause, confusion on my end, and anger on theirs. Before I could respond, he added that I was either blind or chose not to see what needed to be seen. He said I'd gotten proud since I got a house and refused to care about the people who meant something to me. I sighed and asked him to clarify. He sarcastically blew out air and told me I was ignoring the serious situation in the room. He said I chose not to see the family in jeopardy and refused to help. I asked what jeopardy he meant. He looked at Laura, who rolled her eyes and announced she was pregnant. Like any normal person, I wanted to congratulate her, but before I could, she started crying. Susan hugged her and told me I should know what's happening at home and care enough to ask. Dad said Laura found out she's pregnant, and the boy responsible broke up with her because of it. Susan added that Laura decided to keep it, and that should guide our decisions. All I managed to say was, "Can she afford it?" I got death stares from both Laura and Susan, and I meant well. It was my concern. I had already assumed they wanted me to chip in with money to help her, and I was ready to do that. But then Dad stood and walked over to me, sat down, and said that was why he called me. He said he's a good father to his girl, and maybe my mother didn't teach me how to be a good brother, but brothers should sacrifice for their sisters. I beg your pardon? I know they need financial help, but I'm not sacrificing my life for her. I sighed and asked what he wanted me to do. He smiled, patted my back, and said, "That's my good boy." I gave a fake smile, which vanished when Dad spoke his next words. "You're giving your house to Laura." "No, I'm not." "Yes, that's what I said immediately." Dad frowned and asked why not. I told him I could help with cash, but the house is mine. I can lend her a room without rent until she can pay. Dad stood and shouted, "Nonsense! It makes perfect sense to me, Dad." But he insisted I give her the house and move out to buy another for myself. I argued that Laura couldn't afford the bills and manage the house if she's pregnant and unemployed. Dad said those would be my responsibilities. Excuse me, no way. I was furious but remained respectful. I stood and told him that wasn't possible and I was leaving. Then I left. He didn't stop there. He showed up at my house a week later while I was at work. I don't know how he got in or where he got the keys, but when I came home I saw men moving my stuff outside. I hurried inside and asked what they were doing. They said the house owner ordered them to throw my things out. I shouted that I owned the house and told them to put my stuff back inside and leave. I lost my cool. This was the last thing I expected to see coming home. I went inside to find Dad and Laura still demanding I do what brothers should. I told them to leave, but they didn't listen. I told them I'd call the cops. That's when they finally left, cursing me. Now I know this is a lot to read, but it was worse in person. A week has passed and I feel bad, which is why I'm posting here. Was I wrong? I feel like they need me, and I shouldn't cut them off. But there are limits to what I'm willing to do for them. It angers me how disconnected they were while I grew up, but now they expect me to sacrifice for them. Bit much, don't you think? Let me know. I can't involve my friends in this. You all are all I have right now. Update. Hey everyone, it's been a week since I posted, and I didn't expect this much attention. I read the comments, and some made me question things, but I decided not to cut my family off entirely. I got a call from Laura. She wanted to meet, and I agreed. She asked to meet at my house, but I was still recovering from the previous scene, so we met at a coffee shop. She was uneasy at the start. Normally she's arrogant and rude, but she seemed different. We sat in a corner and she told me she was recently broken up with. I responded saying I knew since Dad said the guy who got her pregnant left her. She shook her head and said that's what Dad thinks. I asked what it really was, and she told me Dad thinks her boyfriend left because of commitment issues, but it's her with the issues. Shocking, right? She said she cared for this guy, but he found out things about her just days before she told him about the pregnancy. When they met, he wanted to confront her, but she spoke first, and he got furious. He put a hole in the wall. She said he scared her. Then he told her he was breaking up and left without hearing her response. She's been trying to call him, and he doesn't respond. He texted once saying she needs to get rid of the kid first, then he'll talk to her. Now I know Laura isn't perfect, but this guy, I don't like him. I asked what he found out and she said it'd be weird to tell a brother. I figured it was about OnlyFans and escorting. I shrugged and said it's okay if she doesn't want to tell me. Before I could ask why she wanted to meet, she took a deep breath and said she was involved in shady things. I didn't want confirmation, but I got it. She wanted to paint and become an artist, but Susan told her it wouldn't give her a good life or money. Laura was told to find a man. She gained the attention of older men, which grossed her out. Susan said it was good because older men had money. Laura was only 19, and Susan said college wouldn't give her a comfortable life. Laura had youth, and many would pay for that. Laura wanted to model. She tried many agencies, none were interested. Then she met a guy in his 40s who promised gigs. He took her to parties, bought her clothes and jewelry. She was happy until her first gig, which was selling her time for a modeling opportunity. She thought it was dinner, but spent the night. She got a small gig for a brand, but that was it. More men used her with promises of gigs that never came. She found out the guy was selling her. She was scared to confront him, so she told him she was okay with minimum wage jobs. Thankfully, he let her go. She waited tables at bars, and it was tough. Hard-earned cash, Laura. But Susan humiliated her for small jobs, saying women are the beauty of the world and should shine and smile like showpieces. So Laura started going out with men for dinner and charging for it. But that led to stalkers and obsessive men. She decided talking to men was more problematic than sleeping with them, so she started escorting. It worked until a friend told her about OnlyFans. She tried, but wasn't good with cameras and editing. It required social skills she lacked, so it failed. Then she met her boyfriend, an ex-co-worker. He worked at a barista. They met again, and she liked him, but he was clingy and possessive. He doubted her because she was still on OnlyFans and escorting without his knowledge. She stopped everything, and he took care of her with his little money. Susan wasn't happy. Laura got pregnant, and her boyfriend found out everything. She has a few men who could be potential fathers. They all support her and the kid. One proposed, but they think they're the only one, which is absurd since they know she's an escort. She lets them believe their money pays her bills and helps with the kid. Laura told me all this because she couldn't tell Dad. Dad thinks she's modeling and making little money with one guy who left. Susan knows most of it and suggests Laura marry the guy who proposed, letting him think he's the father. But Laura doesn't know what to tell Dad and doesn't want to marry the guy because he's old and weird. She asked for financial help and for me to reconcile with Dad. She suggested I agree to Dad's demands, move out temporarily, and return when things cool down. How is that a solution? I declined and said I could only contribute cash, but wouldn't move out. She called me selfish for not helping after she shared her life story. She said Dad was right about me, and I deserved to be sent to an orphanage, not taken in. She stomped away. I think my response wasn't extreme, but is it selfish? What do you think of her story? Should I trust her? Let me know. Update this is picking at my brain. Another week passed and things happened. I thought I'd update you. Thanks for the support. After meeting Laura, I got a call from Dad. He wanted to meet at a bar. Curious, I agreed. We sat at the counter, and he said he knew my earnings. I asked why it mattered. He said I could afford another house in a few years. I shrugged, saying I already had a house, and this discussion should end. He insisted it's harder for women to raise a child alone, and the kid needs a safe home. I reminded Dad Laura lived with them, and a baby wouldn't hurt. I asked what she'd do alone in a house when pregnant. I said she needed people around her for care. Then Dad shocked me, saying he and Susan would move in with Laura in my house. I couldn't believe it. Before I reacted, the bartender chuckled sarcastically. Dad took offense and asked what was funny. Laura, he replied. He said she uses everyone and discards them. Dad asked if he knew who he was talking about. The bartender nodded, saying he was her boyfriend. My eyes widened. So this was the guy. Dad balled his fists, asking why he started a family he couldn't support. The guy raised his hands, saying he wasn't responsible for that family. He had no interest in raising a child not his own. Dad dared him to explain. He smiled, saying he had a vasectomy last year to avoid kids. But Laura got pregnant. He saw her with different men after she lied about where she was. He found out about her OnlyFans. When Laura said they were having a baby, it was the last straw. He couldn't have kids, so it confirmed everything. He told Laura she'd been cheating all along, and she admitted it. Dad's face shifted from anger to shock to disappointment. The guy shrugged, saying he owed Laura nothing. She owed him money, time, sincerity, and at least love. He said no dad would be proud of a kid like that. Dad tightened his lip, got off the stool, and walked away. Later, he texted saying he had to pick Susan from her yoga class. The next day, Laura came crying, saying I ruined everything. I pulled her inside to avoid a scene and calmed her. I said I didn't tell Dad anything. It was her boyfriend, the bartender. She said Dad told her to quit everything and stay home. He was disgusted and never thought she'd resort to such practices. He told her to mend her ways and find a good man, but pointed out her chances were slim now. I hugged her. She apologized for thinking it was me. Dad had just come home from meeting me when he confronted her. I forgave her, and she went home. While ranting about how pathetic she felt, she mentioned Susan was quiet when Dad talked about good women's loyalty, like she could say anything. Laura said, one of the things she can't speak about. I asked what she meant. She said Susan couldn't have an opinion since she is yoga. I frowned, confused, before Laura continued crying. Yoga stuck with me. What do you think happened? Is Laura still Dad's pride? No one contacted me since. I'll see and let you know. I didn't expect to update so soon, but I couldn't help it. Update just 2 days after my last update. For those asking, Laura's ex-name is irrelevant, but we'll call him John. Here's the new part. 2 days ago, I met Dad. I said I decided a few things. I wanted to help raise Laura's kid and would lend her a room. I'd pay for diapers, but she needs a job soon. Dad said then there'd be no one with the baby. I suggested she try freelancing or working from home. Dad wasn't his usual rude self. He paused, sighed, and sat on the couch, saying he thought I hated him. He was right, but I asked why he thought that. He said Mom hated him too. I quickly said she never told me that. She always said Dad loved and cared for me. I said I was disappointed because Mom told me that, but Dad showed neglect and lack of care. Dad rubbed his eyes, saying he hated himself for many things. He liked Mom, but they didn't know each other well enough to see if they were compatible. He got her pregnant, so they married. She was a good wife, but there was no spark. Then he met Susan. When he said that, I felt a tingling inside. I couldn't move. I didn't know any of this. Dad said Susan sparked a flame in him. He was happy with her and developed feelings. Before he could figure out right from wrong, Susan got pregnant. He told her it was wrong, but it was too late. He wanted to tell Mom, but Susan felt insecure and told Mom everything. Mom confronted Dad and he admitted it. It was ugly, but Mom was polite and asked for a divorce. Why parents divorced? Because Dad had an affair and got Susan pregnant. I don't know how worse he could get. Dad paused, looked at me, saying he spent a nice year with Susan when Mom died and had to bring me home. Susan hated it. She was insecure, thinking Dad might prioritize me over their baby. So he sent me to boarding school 3 years later to avoid discomfort for Susan. Love makes you do stupid things, he said. I wanted to punch him but controlled it. I turned around to see Susan standing with a water bottle, saying she was leaving for yoga. She put the bottle on the table and went into the kitchen. I blinked, thinking straight, and she left. I followed her out, picked up the water bottle to return. She drove off. I needed a drive to clear my mind. I followed her. She parked at a yoga club, looked around, and walked into an alley. She looked around again and got into another car. She hugged and kissed the driver, and they drove off. I clenched my jaw, parked, and went inside the yoga club. They denied giving info. I insisted I was worried. They said no client named Susan. I waited in my car. When the other car returned, I recorded a video. A man opened her door, hugged and kissed her, then slapped her butt. So much for yoga. I left before she reached the parking lot. Dad cheated, and now he's being cheated on. Karma. Dad called, but I didn't pick up. I'll see what happens. Should I ask Susan? Update. This might be the last update. A lot happened this week. First, I confronted Susan. Dad wasn't home. Laura was asleep. I asked Susan if she had yoga that day. She said she had it every day, even Sundays. She was cooking pasta. I asked who her yoga instructor was. She took a random name. I asked if it was a guy. She laughed, saying, "Why would I take a boy?" I said it's funny since the club had no female instructors. She said I was mistaken, caught off guard. I told her I joined the club yesterday and they said that. She asked how I knew the club. I said I followed her last time. She dropped a spoon. I picked it up. She asked what I was getting at. I said what I saw. She denied it. I said I saw it myself. She shrugged, saying Dad wouldn't believe me. I played the video, saying he'd believe his eyes. She was shocked, then calm, and continued cooking. She said it didn't matter. She planned a divorce. My eyes widened. This woman is despicable. Dad deserved it, but she's a snake. She said the guy she met was her lover of 3 years. They revived their romance. They fell in love long ago, but he was married. He kept his marriage, settled finances, then planned to divorce. But Susan got pregnant, desperate to pin a man for support. She chose Dad. They saw each other, but then Susan got pregnant. She told Dad to do something. He hesitated, so she told Mom. Now her lover is a widower and owns a company. She's ready. She said women need to do what they can, kid, and smiled. But her smile froze, looking over my shoulder. I turned to see Dad, fists clenched, eyes red. He was shaking. Dad woke Laura, brought her to the kitchen, asked who her father was. She looked at Susan, shook her head, saying she always knew Dad as her father. Dad paced the floor. In 2 days, Susan and Laura were told to leave. Divorce is in process. They're in a shelter. Dad asked me to find a therapist and apologized. I forgive him each time. Susan's lover didn't take her in. He denies contact. I have proof. Susan begged for it, asking me to think of Laura's pregnancy. What can I say, Susan? Your kid, your problem. Should I delete the video or hand it over? I'll update later. Thanks for your support. It means a lot.